said, okay, now do it one more time. And the third time we did it, he put the third part on it all the way through perfect. And we went, you know, and we knew exactly what we wanted to do from that point on.
David Crosby, the voice of harmony, rebellion, and musical vision. His songs defined a generation. His collaborations reshaped rock and folk, and his artistry made him a legend. But behind the iconic albums and celebrated performances, there was always another story, one tied to the musicians, idols, and inspirations that shaped his life, yet remained mostly private. For years, fans speculated, wondered, and debated, but Crosby stayed silent, letting the music hint at the influences he held closest. But before he passed, David Crosby finally spoke. And what he revealed about the musicians he loved doesn't just satisfy curiosity, it offers a striking, intimate view of the forces behind a rock icon. Which artists earned his admiration in ways we never expected? Stay with us as we find out. David Crosby, whose voice became a cornerstone of folk rock, sat quietly in the twilight of his years, reflecting on a life defined as much by brilliance as by chaos. His mind traced decades of music, fame, and tumultuous relationships, touching every corner of the scene he had helped shape. To the world, he was a member of iconic bands, a rebel, a songwriter whose harmonies became timeless. But now, Crosby sought something different, a chance to speak plainly about what and who had truly mattered to him in the vast universe of sound he had inhabited. For decades, fans speculated about Crosby's inspirations, the musicians who fueled his fire, and the collaborators who earned his deepest respect. Some guessed the obvious: folk legends, rock icons, voices that dominated the airwaves alongside his own. Others whispered of rivalries, secret jam sessions, and untold stories of camaraderie and conflict. His life had always been public, messy, and scandalous. But here, in private, he wanted to reveal the truth, unfiltered. Crosby's reflections weren't casual shout-outs. Each musician he praised carried weight, a story, a memory. Admiration, for him, was never superficial. It was intimate, forged in shared creativity, late-night conversations, and moments of unspoken understanding. He remembered recording sessions that stretched into the night, the thrill of improvisation, and the quiet perfection of a peer hitting a note that seemed impossible. These memories were vivid, emotionally potent, and inseparable from the music itself. Even as he prepared to share these revelations, Crosby was aware of time's fragility. His voice, once sharp and rebellious, now carried a softness that underscored the urgency of his message.
Because I want to be doing this for the rest of my life. It's easy and it's fun and I'm suited for it.
Not every favorite musician would be a household name. Some had influenced him quietly, yet profoundly. The weight of reflection was both personal and historical. Crosby had witnessed and participated in transformative moments in popular music. Woodstock, the Laurel Canyon scene, and studio sessions that produced songs millions memorized. Yet behind every iconic hit lay influences often hidden in plain sight, musicians overshadowed by fame but essential to his artistic journey. Surrounded by photographs, records, and memories, David Crosby understood that revealing his true musical heroes would not be a mere list. It would be a testament, a declaration of gratitude. His choices would reveal as much about himself as about the artists, what he valued in music, collaboration, and humanity. In the quiet of his final reflections, he prepared to give fans a glimpse into the heart of a man who had spent a lifetime listening, learning, and loving the sounds that shaped him. Long before fame, David Crosby was a boy captivated by sound. Growing up in Los Angeles, the city's streets and radio waves became his first teachers. He listened intently, learning to distinguish not just notes, but nuances, the subtle inflections of a vocal line, the way a guitar could mimic human emotion, the rhythm that made a song linger in the soul. Music was not a pastime. It was an obsession, a compulsion demanding attention, study, and devotion. By his teenage years, Crosby's musical palette had broadened. Folk, jazz, and blues infiltrated his consciousness. He spent hours dissecting records, analyzing every chord, harmony, and improvisation. While other teenagers focused on sports or social acceptance, Crosby was obsessed with textures of sound, the emotion behind a phrase, and the way a song could transcend its structure to evoke pure feeling. These early obsessions shaped his criteria for judging the musicians he would come to love. School and social life often paled in comparison to evenings spent immersed in music. Crosby and a few kindred spirits formed early bands, experimenting, sometimes painfully, with harmonies and rhythms that felt raw but promising. His peers recognized his talent, but rarely grasped the depth of his understanding. This period was about discovery, of music, of his own capabilities, and of the people who would inspire his life's work. During these formative years, he discovered the musicians who left indelible marks on his approach to composition and performance. Some were celebrated legends, others underground artists, whose genius was whispered in tight circles. Each influence carried lessons, technical skill, emotional honesty, or a fearless approach to experimentation. Crosby absorbed these lessons into his creative DNA, sometimes unconsciously, other times with deliberate reverence. It wasn't just admiration, it was understanding the human stories behind the music. He became fascinated with the struggles, triumphs, and failures of the artists he listened to. Talent alone did not define greatness. Courage to innovate, vulnerability to express truth, and resilience against industry pressures were equally vital. This early obsession set the stage for a lifetime of recognizing brilliance in others, sometimes before the world noticed. By young adulthood, as he prepared for the professional music scene, Crosby had a mental list of artists he revered, mentors he hoped to emulate, and collaborators he longed to find. His obsession had become a compass, guiding him toward partnerships and creative risks that would define his legendary career. Every note he played, every harmony he contributed, bore the imprint of these early musical heroes, whose influence would echo in his reflections decades later. As David Crosby approached the final chapters of his life, he felt compelled to speak openly about the musicians who had left permanent marks on him. These were not casual shout-outs or passing mentions. They were artists whose work had guided, challenged, and inspired his most daring moments. They had shaped not only his career, but his very philosophy of music. Among the first names he revealed were folk pioneers, whose harmonies taught him the power of vocal interplay. He spoke with reverence of voices that seemed to float effortlessly, creating textures that transcended lyrics. These musicians showed him that emotion could be conveyed without grand gestures, that subtlety often spoke louder than spectacle. Each mention carried memories of late-night listening sessions, impromptu performances, and letters exchanged in a time before instant communication. Crosby also highlighted jazz and rock innovators who expanded his understanding of rhythm, improvisation, and the fluidity of song structure. He admired those fearless enough to bend musical rules, blend genres, and turn guitar, piano, or voice into instruments of revolution. For him, these figures were mentors and companions in a lifelong dialogue, their recordings serving as conversation pieces that shaped his own experimentation in the studio and on stage. Beyond technical influence, Crosby's confessions revealed his personal admiration for certain musicians. He valued integrity, dedication, and vulnerability, traits he witnessed in others and strove to embody himself. These were not always the most famous artists, but their impact was profound. Some guided him through moments of self-doubt in studios or backstage. Others inspired from afar, their brilliance an invisible hand shaping his artistic choices. Even in his final years, Crosby's recollections were vivid and emotional. Naming these musicians was more than respect. It was acknowledgement of debt, a recognition that his own achievements were inseparable from the inspiration and guidance he received. The list he shared became a map of influence, a constellation of brilliance that illuminated his path, supported him through challenges, and defined his unique place in music history. The revelations stunned fans. For years, whispers circulated about who Crosby truly admired, who shaped his ideas, and who inspired his legendary harmonies. Now, finally, he confirmed it with candor and intimacy, offering a confession not of scandal, but of devotion, a testament to the deep respect, love, and gratitude that had driven him as both musician and man. David Crosby's admiration for musicians extended far beyond records and radio waves. It reached the unseen corridors behind every stage, the rehearsal rooms, and the quiet moments where genius was nurtured without an audience. For decades, fans saw only polished performances, effortless harmonies, and his radiant charisma. But Crosby knew the real magic, the kind that influenced him most, happened in private, away from cameras, spotlights, and critics. He often spoke of those backstage moments with reverence and nostalgia. The musicians he loved weren't just names on an album cover, they were individuals who lived and breathed music in ways that inspired him daily. He remembered nights sitting quietly in a corner, listening to improvisations that defied conventional structure. Riffs, chord changes, and unexpected harmonies became lessons in creativity, persistence, and the boundless possibilities of sound. These moments shaped him more than formal training ever could, embedding themselves into his intuition and the DNA of his own compositions. There was a profound intimacy in these interactions. To witness such musicians was to see vulnerability rarely afforded to the public. A guitarist struggling with a solo, a vocalist faltering mid-phrase. Crosby saw brilliance in their courage to try, fail, and try again. Admiration, he realized, was inseparable from empathy.
So then if you are given the lifetime to do something with, then do something worthwhile.
The humanity of these artists resonated with him more than perfection ever could. Crosby also valued informal collaborations that often went unrecorded. Late-night jam sessions, impromptu harmonies on a porch, unplanned duets during sound checks. These encounters offered unfiltered glimpses into artistry without expectation or pretense, reminding him that music was connection, dialogue, and emotional honesty. More than fame or acclaim, even tension offered lessons. Rivalries, creative disagreements, and clashes over artistic direction became part of the mentorship he received. True influence did not always arrive wrapped in kindness. Sometimes it came with challenge, provocation, or critique sharp enough to cut through complacency. These moments sharpened his skills, redefined assumptions, and helped him grow as a nuanced artist. The backstage insights stayed with him throughout studio recordings, live performances, and his guidance of younger musicians. The artists he admired taught him about sound, technique, resilience, humility, and honoring one's craft. By sharing these experiences in his final years, Crosby painted a portrait of admiration rooted in intimacy, struggle, and mutual respect. A world fans rarely glimpsed, now essential to understanding the man behind the music. For David Crosby, music was never merely transactional, it was relational. Over decades of touring, recording, and collaborating, some of the musicians he admired most evolved into something far deeper: friends, confidants, and even chosen family. These bonds were forged not in boardrooms or press events, but through shared experiences, sleepless nights, creative breakthroughs, and sometimes the pain of loss. Crosby often spoke of the camaraderie that shaped him, the people who showed up not for fame or applause, but for music itself. These friendships were tested through the trials of touring, the pressures of recording, and the inevitably high stakes of the music industry. Yet, many endured, strengthened by loyalty, shared humor, and a recognition that artistry was a solitary pursuit, even when surrounded by others. In his reflections, Crosby emphasized that these relationships were as influential on his career as the music itself. Some of the friendships he cherished came from unlikely places: rival bands whose members became collaborators after years of mutual admiration, producers who initially seemed intimidating but became mentors, roadies and session musicians who contributed wisdom quietly, far from the public eye.
As a producer and as a writer,
he wrote the best thing on this record.
Each connection offered a different perspective, challenging Crosby to grow both personally and professionally. These bonds reinforced a critical truth he often shared. Music is as much about trust and empathy as it is about talent. Crosby also highlighted the emotional dimensions of these friendships. Loss, illness, and personal struggles created opportunities for vulnerability and support. He recalled times when a fellow musician became a lifeline during moments of despair or doubt. These were relationships that transcended performance and studio work. They were human connections that sustained him through periods of addiction, career uncertainty, and personal heartbreak. Fans often saw only the stage persona, but Crosby's family of friends was a constant, stabilizing presence, providing the strength to endure the volatility of fame. The depth of these friendships also influenced his music. Harmonies were richer because they were born from genuine connection. Collaborations were daring because trust existed to take risks. Even in songwriting, the voices and experiences of those he loved inspired lyric, tone, and arrangement. To Crosby, the human element behind the music was inseparable from the art itself. These relationships also served as a lens through which Crosby could evaluate other musicians he admired. It wasn't just technical skill or commercial success that garnered respect. It was integrity, generosity, and the capacity to forge lasting bonds. By naming these people in his final reflections, Crosby revealed the often unseen networks of love, mentorship, and inspiration that had carried him through decades of life in the spotlight. The revelation was clear. His career was not a solo journey, but a tapestry woven from the lives of those he loved and who loved him in return. David Crosby's career was peppered with rivalries, from heated debates over creative direction to competition for airtime and recognition. Yet, paradoxically, these rivalries often deepened his admiration for the very musicians with whom he clashed. To Crosby, friction was not a threat, but a lens for understanding genius. Tension often revealed the character, skill, and determination of fellow artists in ways that praise never could. He recalled moments when arguments over arrangements or songwriting credits became intense, sometimes messy, and always revealing. These conflicts highlighted both differences in vision and the shared commitment to excellence. Crosby learned that true admiration wasn't unconditional. It was earned, challenged, and continually tested. Rivalry, in his view, was another form of mentorship, forcing him to sharpen instincts, refine technique, and embrace humility. Crosby also recognized that these tensions often masked profound respect. Behind the words of disagreement were layers of recognition for talent, creativity, and resilience. He could argue with a fellow musician one day and marvel at the brilliance of the same individual the next. The duality of rivalry and admiration shaped his relationships and influenced how he approached both collaboration and solo work. Even his most publicized disputes, with bandmates, collaborators, or contemporaries, had a deeper dimension. They were opportunities to observe character under pressure, to measure authenticity and resolve. These rivalries became part of the narrative of his career, a dramatic backdrop against which admiration shone even more brightly. To fans, the conflicts might have seemed like scandal, but to Crosby, they were essential, forging bonds, clarifying artistic priorities, and revealing the essence of those he respected most. In his final confessions, Crosby named individuals who had been rivals, yet inspired him profoundly. These were musicians whose creative fire challenged him, whose successes he celebrated even in private tension. By acknowledging both conflict and admiration, he offered a nuanced view of influence, one that embraced complexity, contradiction, and the messy realities of human relationships. Ultimately, rivalry and admiration were inseparable in Crosby's musical universe. Each clash, critique, and challenge became a mirror reflecting skill, integrity, and emotional depth. Fans gained insight into a man whose respect was hard-earned, whose admiration ran deep, and whose legacy was shaped not only by collaboration, but by the tensions that refined genius. In revealing these truths before his passing, Crosby left a testament to the intertwined nature of rivalry, admiration, and the pursuit of musical greatness. David Crosby's reverence for music legends was not the kind of casual admiration fans might expect. It ran deeper, rooted in personal encounters, late-night listening sessions, and the quiet observation of artistry that transformed him from a gifted musician into an innovator. Over the decades, Crosby often spoke about those whose influence extended far beyond style or technique. These were the figures whose very presence changed the way he approached melody, harmony, and the art of storytelling through song.
He was an original member of the Byrds and the founder of Crosby, Stills and Nash, but he was almost as well known for his troubled personal life as for his music.
He often mentioned Joni Mitchell first, not merely as a collaborator, but as a masterful mentor in spirit. Crosby marveled at her lyricism, the raw emotional honesty, and the fearless approach to challenging musical norms. To him, Mitchell's genius was not just in her notes or phrasing, but in the way she wielded music as a tool for personal expression, social commentary, and intimate storytelling. Each song she shared was a lesson in vulnerability and courage, a blueprint for how to balance commercial appeal with deep authenticity. Then there were the jazz and folk musicians who quietly reshaped his musical DNA. Figures like Charles Mingus, John Coltrane, and even older folk icons offered Crosby a vocabulary for improvisation, unexpected chord progressions, and melodic exploration that defied the mainstream expectations of rock music. He recounted sitting in smoky clubs or dimly lit rehearsal spaces, absorbing every subtle shift in rhythm, every daring harmonic choice. These musicians weren't just inspiration, they were touchstones, demonstrating that greatness often comes from taking risks and daring to be misunderstood. Crosby also revered his contemporaries in rock, people whose creative integrity demanded both respect and careful study. He spoke at length about Graham Nash, Stephen Stills, and Neil Young, the musicians who formed not only a band, but a crucible of artistic experimentation. While conflicts arose within those collaborations, Crosby's admiration was unwavering. Each disagreement, each divergent vision became a lesson in balance, compromise, and understanding. The admiration for these contemporaries was rooted not in hero worship, but in a recognition of shared dedication to craft and honesty. He didn't confine his praise to those whose fame matched his own. Session musicians, backing vocalists, and even arrangers who worked in the shadows were also integral to his musical formation. Crosby described moments in studios where a single harmonic suggestion, a bass line tweak, or a subtle percussion nuance shifted a song from good to transcendent. He credited these unsung heroes with teaching him humility, attention to detail, and the quiet power of listening. Crosby's list of admired musicians extended globally, too. He spoke of discovering artists from other countries whose music carried a cultural richness he could only approximate in his own work. These influences reminded him that music is a universal language, and that true artistry doesn't respect borders. By weaving these lessons into his own compositions, Crosby elevated his music into a fusion of folk, rock, jazz, and global sounds that made him a timeless innovator. Ultimately, the musicians he loved most were those who challenged him, taught him, and inspired him to reach beyond the ordinary. Before his passing, Crosby made it clear that his artistic journey was inseparable from the mentorship, collaboration, and inspiration he drew from these legends. For fans, the revelation wasn't just a list of names. It was a window into the crucible that forged one of rock's most visionary figures. David Crosby's love for music was inseparable from his fascination with harmony, not merely the notes, but the emotional resonance that occurs when voices and instruments align. Throughout his life, he studied how musicians created spaces in songs for vulnerability, connection, and dialogue. The musicians he admired most, he often said, taught him lessons in heart as much as in technique.
We were a synthesis band. We were We were the first American rock and roll band to answer the British invasion.
Crosby recalled moments of sitting in small recording studios, listening to singers who could bend notes in ways that seemed effortless, yet were painstakingly precise. These were not just exercises in pitch or tone, they were exercises in storytelling. Harmony, to Crosby, was a conversation, an emotional negotiation between performers and audience, between individual talent and collective expression. The lessons he absorbed in these moments shaped the core of his artistry. He also emphasized the patience required to understand other musicians fully. True mastery, he believed, was not only in executing a perfect solo, but in listening, really listening, to the intentions, fears, and creative impulses of others. Crosby's own collaborations benefited enormously from this approach. Whether with bandmates, session musicians, or guest artists, he cultivated a sensitivity that allowed him to integrate disparate voices into something cohesive and breathtaking. Many of his most admired musicians taught him the importance of restraint. Some of the greatest lessons, Crosby revealed, came from watching others deliberately choose when not to play, when silence carried more weight than a flourish of notes. This approach informed his own writing and performance philosophy, helping him understand that music's power lies as much in what is unsaid as in what is sung. Crosby also found lessons in vulnerability. Some of the musicians he cherished most were unafraid to expose personal pain, trauma, or doubt through song. Their willingness to bare their souls, often at the risk of criticism or misunderstanding, showed him that emotional honesty was indispensable in art. He incorporated this into his own work, crafting lyrics and harmonies that were complex yet deeply human. These lessons extended beyond the studio. Crosby often spoke about how observing the emotional lives of musicians, their joys, disappointments, and triumphs, informed his own capacity for empathy. The musicians he admired most weren't just technically skilled, they were courageous, compassionate, and willing to risk personal exposure to create something transcendent. Through them, Crosby learned that music was a bridge between hearts, a medium that could communicate what words alone could not. In revealing these final truths before his death, Crosby made it clear that admiration for musicians wasn't superficial. It was a rigorous, ongoing study of craft, character, and emotional truth. The lessons he learned in harmony and heart defined both his music and his legacy, leaving fans with a profound understanding of why he loved the musicians he loved and how they helped him become one of the greatest voices of his generation. In the twilight of his life, David Crosby chose to speak plainly about the musicians who had meant the most to him. The confessions were as heartfelt as they were revealing, painting a portrait of influence, mentorship, and enduring admiration. For years, fans speculated about who inspired Crosby, who challenged him, and who he held closest in his heart. Now, in his final reflections, he offered clarity, depth, and unexpected insight. He spoke of admiration not as a casual acknowledgement, but as a moral and artistic compass. The musicians he named were those who had shaped his approach to life, music, and relationships. They weren't chosen for fame or accolades, but for integrity, generosity, and courage. These were the people who taught him resilience, who celebrated his successes without envy, and who offered critique without diminishing his dignity. Crosby also revealed the human side of his reverence. Many of the musicians he loved had faced struggles, addictions, or heartbreak, yet they created beauty despite their trials. He admired their ability to endure, to transform pain into melody, and to inspire others without losing their authenticity. To him, true influence came from character as much as skill, and this perspective reshaped the way fans understood his own career.
I can't explain it. I know I was there. I know that's whose house it was. I know what happened.
There was a humility in Crosby's confessions. He acknowledged mistakes, rivalries, and conflicts, yet framed them within a context of growth and learning. The musicians he loved were mirrors and teachers, reflecting both his strengths and his weaknesses. These final words were not about ego. They were about gratitude. a recognition of the communal nature of artistry and the invisible networks of inspiration that sustain even the most celebrated careers. Crosby's confessions also carried an urgency. He spoke as one who knew his time was limited, emphasizing that admiration should be expressed while it still can be. By naming his influences and sharing their impact, he preserved their legacies alongside his own, ensuring that future generations would understand the threads of creativity connecting them all. Ultimately, these final reflections reveal a man deeply conscious of music as a shared, sacred space. The musicians he loved, the lessons he learned, and the confessions he offered form a legacy intertwined with generosity, honesty, and reverence. David Crosby's final words serve as a masterclass in admiration, a testament to the power of human connection, and a reminder that behind every great musician lies a constellation of influences, mentors, and inspirations that shape the art we celebrate. David Crosby's final reflections were not just about admiration for other musicians. They were about the broader legacy he would leave behind. At the heart of his revelations was a profound understanding that music is never created in isolation. Every chord he played, every harmony he layered, was shaped by countless hands, voices, and spirits that preceded him. He wanted the world to know that his genius, celebrated and studied for decades, was built on a foundation of learning, listening, and loving the craft through others. He spoke at length about mentorship, both received and given. Crosby never hoarded his knowledge or insight. Even in his later years, he shared candid advice with young musicians, insisting that understanding influence was key to artistic growth. He told stories of late-night jam sessions, of quiet studio moments where a passing comment or a subtle chord shift forever altered a song. These weren't just anecdotes, they were lessons in humility and gratitude. "Every note I sang, every harmony I added," he said, "was a conversation with those who came before me." Crosby's confessions also highlighted the emotional complexity of love in the music world. He didn't shy away from discussing friendships that soured, partnerships that faltered, and the heartbreaks that inevitably intertwined with professional life. Yet even in these admissions, there was a deep sense of forgiveness. He acknowledged rivals, former collaborators, and even critics, recognizing that their challenges pushed him to refine his voice and deepen his craft. To him, love and music were inseparable. The ability to create something timeless required openness, vulnerability, and courage. He reflected on the personal cost of fame and artistry. The musicians he loved most had faced struggles, addiction, heartbreak, societal pressures, and Crosby saw himself mirrored in their experiences. He admitted that these revelations were not merely historical, they were deeply personal. Speaking openly about who influenced him allowed him to process years of joy, loss, and complexity in ways that no fanfare or performance could convey. It was a final act of transparency, a gift to those who admired him not just for his voice, but for his mind and heart.
Here I am, and I'm trying my best to be a decent guy, and if you want to make some music, I'd love to.
Crosby also considered the future. He wanted young musicians to understand that admiration is active, not passive. It requires listening, studying, and absorbing lessons with intention. He urged them to look beyond fame and accolades, to seek out the stories, struggles, and triumphs of those who came before them. These stories, he believed, were the invisible scaffolding that supports every artist's work. His own music, built on such foundations, was proof of how transformative this practice could be. Ultimately, David Crosby's final words were about legacy, a legacy defined not solely by awards or record sales, but by connection, influence, and love. By revealing the musicians who shaped him, he ensured that their voices would continue to echo through his songs, reaching listeners long after he was gone. He framed his life not as a solitary journey, but as a continuum of inspiration and mentorship, a reminder that music is always larger than the individual. In the end, his confessions were a testament to the enduring power of admiration, collaboration, and truth. For fans and fellow musicians alike, Crosby's reflections offered more than nostalgia. They were a roadmap for understanding how greatness is cultivated, how love and music intertwine, and how every note, no matter how small, carries the weight of 1,000 voices. David Crosby passed on his final lessons not with a whisper, but with the resonance of a lifetime spent in harmony. And in doing so, he left the world with an indelible gift, the knowledge that the music we cherish is built on the hearts, struggles, and brilliance of those who came before. If influence shapes more than sound, should we just celebrate the songs or question the inspirations behind them? Before he passed, David Crosby finally revealed the musicians who meant the most to him, but the meaning of his words depends on how we pay attention. Before time turns legend into memory, remember, some truths are meant to resonate forever. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.